Well, probably everybody's heard of Fritjof or read one or several of his many best-selling books. He's a physicist and systems theorist and founding director of the Center for Eco-Literacy in Berkeley. He serves on the faculty of the Amana Key Executive Education Program in Sao Paulo, Brazil, a fellow of the Schumacher College in the UK, and serves on the Council of Earth Charter International. Fritjof is the author of several international bestsellers, including The Tao of Physics, which I mentioned earlier, The Web of Life, and The Science of Leonardo. He's co-author with Pierre Luigi Luisi of the interdisciplinary textbook, The Systems View of Life. His new online course is based on this text, and you can access this on his website, www.capracourse.net. Fritjof lives in Berkeley, so please join me in a warm welcome for Fritjof Capra.
All right, thank you, Michael. I must say I feel very nostalgic because when you took a break and were casually stepping outside, I knew exactly what you were seeing, where you were, remembered the air, and I was very sorry not to be able to join you there. But we do what we can, and I'm glad that the technology allows us to communicate in this way.
Next year for you.
So, as I mentioned before, I would like to begin with the observation that it is impossible to give a precise definition of health. And that is because health is to a large extent a subjective experience whose quality can be known intuitively but can never be exhaustively described or quantified. What we can say from an empirical point of view is that health is a state of well-being that arises when the organism functions in a certain way. Well, how does the organism need to function so that we can experience this state of health or sanity, wholeness, and so on? The description of this way of functioning will depend on how we describe the living organism. This means that our understanding of health will always be linked to our understanding of life. Different models of living organisms will lead to different definitions of health. Now, as many of you know, I've spent the last few decades developing a synthesis of a new understanding of life, which has emerged at the forefront of science. I call my synthesis the systems view of life, and that's also the title of the textbook I wrote with Pierre Luigi Luisi. And I call it the systems view of life because it involves systemic thinking or systems thinking, which means thinking in terms of relationships, in terms of patterns, in terms of context. So what I'd like to do is to briefly summarize this systems view of life and then propose a corresponding systems view of health. Well, according to the systems view, the central characteristic of biological life is what poets and sages throughout the ages have called the breath of life. In modern scientific language, this breath of life is known as metabolism, and it is defined as a ceaseless flow of energy and matter through a network of chemical processes which enables a living organism to continually regenerate itself. And the great importance and recent recognition of the importance of regeneration is why I decided to give my talk the title Healing and the Regeneration of Life. So metabolism is the central characteristic of biological life. As the great microbiologist Lynn Margulis used to say, if it metabolizes, it's alive. If it doesn't metabolize, it's not. Well, it sounds very simple, but this verb metabolizing contains actually a complex combination of concepts, and in particular, two basic aspects: flows and networks. So metabolism is a continuous flow of energy and matter through a network of chemical processes. So let me begin with networks. The key insight here is that the network is the basic pattern of organization of all living systems. Ecosystems are understood as networks of organisms. Organisms are networks of tissues and cells. Cells are networks of molecules. And social systems are networks of communications. So wherever we see life, we see networks. Now, of course, not every network is a living network. The key characteristic of a living network is that it is self-generating. It continually regenerates itself by transforming or replacing its components. Now, the continual regeneration of life is ancient knowledge. We just have to think about the turning of the seasons, a new growth in every spring. That's regeneration. What is new in the systems view is the realization that this process of regeneration operates at all levels of complexity, down to the molecular networks in cells. Regeneration is the very essence of the life process. We have often learned in the past that a cell is a process, life is a process, and when you ask, what exactly is it? What kind of process is it? The answers were rather vague. Well, today we know the very essence of the process of life is regeneration. When regeneration stops, life stops. In a more philosophical vein, and maybe we can go into this later, you could also say that regeneration is the purpose of life, or regeneration is the meaning of life. Now, the continual regeneration of living networks, the continual transformation and replacement of components requires a continual flow of materials, a continual flow of energy and matter. And this is how the network aspect of metabolism is linked to the flow aspect. Metabolic flows are an essential aspect of the process of regeneration. Now, the next important observation is that these metabolic flows go through networks. And as you know, a network is non-linear, it goes in all directions, and specifically it can embody cyclical movements. In a network, you can go around in cycles. And this is what actually happens in all living networks. There are cycles of flows, and these cycles can act as feedback loops. This very important concept of feedback, which was discovered in cybernetics in the 1940s, has the consequence that a living network can regulate itself, because when some message goes out or some effect, some process goes out and then comes back, the next time it goes out, it can be adjusted. And so the entire network can regulate itself and ultimately can organize itself. As you may know, feedback comes in two kinds. It can be a self-balancing feedback, leading to a state of homeostasis, or it can be a self-amplifying feedback, also popularly known as runaway feedback. And this amplifying feedback may lead to states of instability where the entire system becomes unstable and then may either break down, or what happens much more frequently, there may be a spontaneous emergence of new order. This spontaneous emergence of new order at critical points of instability, often referred to simply as emergence, implies that creativity, the creation, the generation of new forms, is a key property of living systems. That's also a very important insight of this recently formulated systems view of life. Life is inherently creative. So if we are creative, it's not because we may happen to be artists or designers or other types of creative people. No, we are creative simply because we are alive, because life itself is creative. And finally, I want to mention the special way in which living systems interact with their environment. A living organism responds to influences from the environment with structural changes. And it does so autonomously, specifying which influences to notice and how to respond. And it responds according to its nature, according to its sensory apparatus and all the other parts of its structure, and according to previous experience. And this response is identified as cognitive. So the response of a living organism to environmental influences is a cognitive response. Continual cognitive interactions with the environment are an essential part of an organism's metabolism. And in this way, life and cognition are inseparably linked. Life is inherently intelligent. What this means is no less than overcoming the age-old, centuries-old Cartesian division between mind and matter. Cognition is the process of life, the process of responding to environmental influences, the process of knowing, and the body or matter is the structure in which this process is embedded. So the relationship between cognition and biological structure, between mind and body, is a relationship between process and structure. So this has been, I've thrown quite a lot of concepts at you, and we can certainly discuss them and clarify them later on. But I want to go on now to outline a systems view of health corresponding to this systems view of life. So just to repeat, the systems view sees life as organizing itself in networks that are inherently regenerative, sustained by continual flows of energy and matter. In other words, life is a process or a network of processes, and therefore health must also be seen as a process rather than a static state of well-being. Moreover, and I didn't go into these details, but just to tell you that the systems view integrates several dimensions of life, in particular the biological, the cognitive, the social, and the ecological dimension. And therefore, the process of health must also be seen as multidimensional, having interacting biological, cognitive, social, and ecological dimensions. Now let me try and give you a more detailed idea of this process of health. And we can start from the observation, as I have mentioned, that all living networks have feedback loops embedded in them. The continual feedback in response to changes in the environment leads to a dynamic state, a stability that is totally dynamic in terms of continual fluctuation. It is well known that whatever we observe in our body, whatever we measure in our body, fluctuates. Whether we talk about the rhythm of breathing, the heartbeat, the blood circulation, the hormonal flows, and so on and so forth. All these variables fluctuate, and the more dynamic the state of the system, the greater is its flexibility, its ability to adapt to changing situations. Loss of flexibility means loss of health. So based on this view of living systems, I have proposed a systemic definition of health as a state of well-being resulting from a dynamic balance that involves physical and psychological aspects of the organism, as well as its interactions with the natural and social environment. So again, health is a state of well-being or an experience of well-being resulting from a dynamic balance that involves the physical and psychological aspects of the organism, as well as its interaction with its natural and social environment. Now, this definition of health allows us to understand the potential of self-healing inherent in every organism. It is the organism's innate tendency to regenerate itself in a balanced state when it has been disturbed. In other words, health and healing are seen as particular processes of regeneration. Now, healing may involve returning to a previous balanced state, or it may involve stages of crisis and transformation, the manifestations of life's creativity, resulting in an entirely new balanced state. For our discussions here, this second mode of healing in terms of crisis and transformation is particularly interesting because R.D. Laing was keenly interested in this process. In fact, I want to mention that, to my knowledge, Laing was the first to see healing as a process of crisis and transformation, as breakthrough rather than breakdown, as he put it. And this was several decades before this process, now known as emergence, was discovered and explored in the language of complexity theory. So Laing was way ahead of his time with this insight. Well, speaking of health, we also need to remember that according to the system's view, life is inherently intelligent because the interactions of a living organism with its environment are always cognitive interactions. And these interactions include, in particular, the process of getting sick and getting well, the process of falling ill and healing. In other words, there is a cognitive or mental dimension in every illness, even if it often lies in the realm of the unconscious. Now, we are particularly interested here in cases where this cognitive dimension, this mental dimension, dominates and becomes conscious, but it is present in all kinds of illnesses, even if it is often unconscious. So I've tried to be as compact as possible in this presentation of the system's view of life and the system's view of health, and it has many, many implications for medicine, for healthcare, for mental illness, for all kinds of aspects and issues, and we could go in many directions, but I will stop here and look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you so much, Fritjof. I did have one comment, a question I wanted to raise before turning it over to discussion. What you were saying about the more dynamic and flexible, the more healthy, and the self-regeneration made me think about this comment I made in my talk about this comes something that Freud cites. I dressed the wounds, but God healed him. Are you saying that healing is for the most part a self-healing? That it's about setting up the right conditions that we can heal ourselves?
Absolutely. The nature of life, which has been honed by evolution for billions of years, the nature of life is such that an organism, a living organism, can regain balance when it has got out of balance. Now, sometimes this is very simple. For instance, when we exert ourselves too much and don't sleep enough, we may get a sore throat, a very minor type of illness. Just by resting, maybe drinking some nice tea and just resting and taking it easy, the sore throat will disappear. The organism goes back into balance. In other cases, it'll be stages of crisis and transformation, but the potential of self-healing is always there. And it's interesting, since we're talking about etymology today, that the root of the word therapist is the Greek verb therapeuin, which means to assist or to attend. And the idea in Hippocratic medicine is that the therapist attends to the healing forces and assists the natural healing forces.
Yeah, this is exactly what you were referring to, that Lang set up, that the houses did not offer treatment because the healing was generated by the community of people living together and interacting together.
What you can offer and have to offer is to prepare a certain environment which is optimal for the healing to take place.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's turn it over to you, Gary.
So I can see how your systems view applies to humans for sure, and maybe potentially vertebrates. But when you get down to multicellular or unicellular organisms, which are definitely alive, it seems like there's a leap to get to cognition as a fundamental aspect of life interacting with its environment. So I'm wondering if you can help me bridge that gap of how there's cognition for basic life or unicellular, multicellular, invertebrate organisms.
Yeah, well, this bridging of the gap is one of the greatest achievements of the systems view of life, if not the greatest achievement. The theory behind it is called the Santiago theory of autopoiesis and cognition. Santiago because it was created by two Chilean biologists, Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, at the University of Chile in Santiago. And autopoiesis was a term they coined from the Greek. It means self-making, and it was their term for what we now call regeneration. And the idea is that they actually worked exclusively with cells and with cellular regeneration, and they discovered that in every cell there is a network of processes that functions in such a way that they are processes of production of proteins and other molecules, which work in such a way that the produced parts, the produced molecules, then are integrated into the cellular network and contribute to the production of other molecules. So it is a continual network of production where all parts contribute to the production of other and replacement of other parts, so that the entire network produces itself. And then they studied how these cellular networks interact with their environment, and they found out that every interaction leads to structural changes, and this is why they called these interactions structural coupling. A living network, a cellular network, couples to the environment structurally, which means it undergoes continual structural changes, and the key now is that these changes are directed by the system itself, are not imposed by the environment, but are directed by the system itself. Another way of describing this situation is to say that every living organism, including single-celled organisms, interacts with its environment via sensory organs. And of course, in bacteria and other single-celled organisms, these sensory organs are very, very simple. And then with increasing complexity of the living organism, of the species, the sensory organs become more and more complex. and so do the cognitive processes. A sort of a philosophical way of describing it would be to take the old philosophical term sentient and say living beings are sentient beings, and in the systems view, their sentient interactions are identified as cognitive interactions. So to really go into some detail would take quite a bit of time, because this is a very radical theory, but in my view it did bridge this gap, this Cartesian gap between cognition and biological structure, between mind and matter.
Thank you, Fritjof. And sentient also means intelligent, yes? As well as cognitive?
Right.
Fritjof, that's great, because it reminds me of the great metaphysical systems from antiquity, particularly looking at the notion of panpsychism, or what we might call cosmopsychism today. It dovetails nicely into the whole notion of process reality that was anticipated by the German idealists, where they hold generative and particularly unconscious potencies that are part of the entire nature. They would call it philosophy of nature, but we might call it of a cosmology today, the universe. And then also into the dialectical types of philosophies like Hegel, Schelling, people like that, but also in the 20th century with Alfred North Whitehead, and where he's trying to really describe what you're getting at, how everything is interconnected, how everything is qualitative variations. So if you talk about...
And process-oriented. Whitehead was very process-oriented.
Yeah, absolutely. But as Gary was talking about the notion of cognition, I think people get hung up on that because it often is attributed to the human psyche. But if we look at it metaphorically, I can certainly see how you would use that term. The question I guess I have is, do you see a sense of, if everything is internally self-directed and internally oriented toward a regenerative process that's based upon, a certain type of interaction between internal processes and the external world that's incorporated into our living systems, and then they mutate and they change. Is that is that teleologically oriented toward a higher level of organization? And if so, how do you account for a certain type of pathology, a certain type of like dialectical regression that would be part of what we in the mental health profession deal with all the time: degeneration, disintegration, disorder, disease, whatever you want to call it. Now, are the two in dialectical relation to one another? So I guess I'm asking too many questions, but I'll stop.
Yes, but I think your second question really answers your first question. So, and I say that because, in my view, it's not necessary to adopt a teleological perspective. When you study evolution, it is possible to understand it without being goal-directed. Although there is, it's a tricky question, because apparently there is a tendency toward increasing complexity. And as far as I know, nobody has been able to really explain or understand this tendency. I had a discussion about this with the Nobel laureate Ilya Prigozhin, who was one of the pioneers of the systems view, and he told me that he believes that there is a tendency of living organisms to go farther and farther from equilibrium and at the same time become more and more complex. And he said, I believe that, but I can't prove it. But so if we assume that there is no goal in terms of a mental image of a goal, which is what we mean in human life. When we have a goal, we have a picture of what we want to achieve, we have an idea, we have a mental image, and there are no mental images in evolution. And therefore, not everything that evolves, not everything that emerges is viable, and there are, harmful evolutionary results of evolutionary creativity, and others that are not harmful. So it can go in both directions. Let me just add a comment to the way you started with cognition and this very radical new concept of cognition and implicitly of mind. This was discovered and created by two scientists independently at around almost in the same year, at the same time in the late 1960s. One was Gregory Bateson and the other one was Umberto Maturana. And Bateson developed it actually here at Esalen, and where he wrote his book Mind and Nature. I remember I had many discussions with Bateson in the late 1970s, 78, 79, and he gave me his book Mind and Nature. He gave me the manuscript to read, and I borrowed the manuscript for a day, and I sat down on this ledge above the baths in the area that used to be called Firo, the Firo cabins, and I spent the whole day there reading Bateson's manuscript. So that's a memory I treasure very much.
Thanks. Let me just follow up. So when I talk about teleology, I'm not talking about a predetermined end goal that's built into a system, not like an Aristotelian one, but rather a self-determinate process that takes place in the moment. So certain types of agentic kinds of activities take place, certain choices could take place within that limited context. So it's not predetermined, but it sounds like that your system would fit that. The other comment, general comment about the notion of cognition, is that it's obvious that we don't read everybody. The sciences don't read the philosophers. Philosophers don't often read physics and biological sciences. So the notion of cognition is a concept that is fundamental to Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. He talks about the whole process of mind or spirit, and it sounds very, very similar to yours. It's a process of becoming that becomes much more complex.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name. Whom are you talking about?
Georg Hegel, the German idealist. Yeah. I mean, it sounds very compatible to your system, and which means that what you're getting at could easily accommodate or incorporate a number of different points of view in the history of ideas. which would fit into your system's point of view.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I just wondered, Fritjof, about the question that John brought up about, well, what accounts for breakdown? Freud thought that the reason why humans develop neurotic or psychotic symptoms always gets down to fear. Do you have an overarching notion of, on every level, when there is breaking away from health toward degeneration, that accounts for that?
No, not really, because, although I love hanging out with you guys, your field is not my expertise. And this is precisely why I love to come back again and again to these lying symposia, because I always learn something. But I don't do research in that area, so I really don't. I really can't answer your question.
All right, thanks for sure.
Hi, Fritjof. Thank you very much. It was great.
Hi, is that Australia?
Yes, hello. Yeah, it's me. Yeah. I'm back here. Yeah, oh, here. Can you see me?
No, I
No,
can't.
because you're so
Okay.
far back.
Okay. I'm thinking about life and death. So, if being out of balance could be a creative state, I'm thinking also about the limit of an organism. Where is the limit of the organism? And also about regenerating, because generating would be connected to life. If the would be connected to death, so regenerating would be life and death together, or is just being out of balance, not really close to death, but just mess, or I don't know. I have not formulated very well the question. I'm sorry, but it's. Yeah.
This is a very deep thought, and my way of, I have thought a lot about this in the following way. When you talk about regeneration, say, take the example of an organism like our body regenerating its cells continually, and in fact quite rapidly in certain tissues, then this regeneration, as I just emphasized, is the very essence of the process of life. Without regeneration, there is no life. But when you look at this process of regeneration, in this particular example, from the point of view of the cells, for the cells, this process is a cycle of life and death, or of death and rebirth. And so the question is every death at every level a part of a cyclical process of death and rebirth? And as you know, there are many spiritual traditions that believe that and hold on to this notion of regeneration or of rebirth as regeneration. And so what this teaches us is the profound lesson that death is not the opposite of life, but is the very essence of life at a higher level.
Thank you Fritjof.
Yeah, I love that. That brings the therapeutic aspect and the psychotherapeutic aspect in. I was also thinking about this, and this sort of tags back. I wasn't going to say anything, but as you were speaking, Fritjof, I was thinking about the whole movement around stem cell medicine and how it relates to what you're speaking about. I'm not a scientific mind in terms of medical scientific mind. I'm more of a psychotherapist mind, but that's what kind of got triggered in me in thinking about stem cell medicine. It is regenerative. We're using cellular medicine to regenerate parts of the body that are in entropy or dying or needing a boost, and so that feels relative. And I just wanted to toss that in there.
Okay, Michael, and I think this might be our last question.
Thank you for that beautiful talk. I feel a little bit out of my depth here, but what emerged for me was thinking about technology. You know, when you talk, it sounds like the system, emergence, and creativity. But I feel that we're somewhat under attack as a system from the very technology that we've created. I was just wondering, had you any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure whether I understand the question. Is there a question? And because the sound was not too great. Michael,
sorry.
if you could repeat it, I can hear your sound better.
Oh, is this mic is better? Michael was just raising the question about technology and our relationship with it, and how it seems a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's amazing the gifts that we continue to get from it. On the other hand, there does seem to be another side to it, which is very destructive to human interaction and being. He was wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, I think we need to link, and this is something I have learned recently, that we need to link the issue of technology with a more general issue, and that is our obsession with continual unlimited economic growth, quantitative economic growth, and the corresponding shift that has occurred somewhere in the late 19th century from economics being concerned with human well-being, and wealth was defined as well-being, to economics being concerned with money. Money not as a means to well-being, but as an end. And so, when you look at technology today, any kind of new technology will be used to increase making money for corporations, for individuals, organizations. And so this shift from well-being to making money, often at the expense of human well-being, is something that I think needs to be addressed when we talk about technology. But as I said, I just, this was pointed out in a discussion recently, and it struck me, and I haven't really thought much more about it.
Well, thank you so much, Fritjof. It looks like we're out of time. But thank you for a wonderful talk with you.
Okay, thank you. I wish I could stay, but I wish you a great symposium, a great week. And I will check in with Michael when he comes back to Berkeley and hear more of your tales.
All right, thanks
Bye,
again.
everybody.
Bye-bye.